What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Going the Distance podcast presented by ImmaculateSports.com. Twitter's at ImmacuSports.
Instagram is also at Max Sports.
TikTok, YouTube, Immaculate Sports. It's episode 220, week 13 of college football in the books. We'll be talking about week 14, what that means for the playoffs, too. Once those come out, it's about 5 o'clock here on Tuesday. Rankings should be coming out pretty soon. Also, football, we're officially on to that last quarter of the season. We're headed over to week 12 now. My fantasy team's doing awesome, and we're going to talk about some rookie quarterbacks too.
Yeah. Of course, it's a big week always in football when Thanksgiving week rolls around. We have a couple of big games on Thanksgiving for the NFL, a ton of big games on Black Friday for the college. And of course, scattered throughout the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, some big games in the NFL and college football. Of course, we did have a few MLB moves, so nothing crazy, but we did have some, maybe the start of the hot stove and some of that stuff, which is always good to see. As November seems to be probably the slowest month in the year of MLB moves and whatnot. So hopefully we get more of that stuff in the future. But we'll get started with our openers. I had Saquon again. I talked about Saquon last week, and I guess he just kind of multiplied what I was talking about last week with him having a good old line. They talked about it a ton on the Sunday night broadcast, and I mean he's making the most of it. 255 yards on the ground. I'm sure we'll talk more about him once we get to the player of the week. But I did also want to talk about just, I guess technically the best thing I saw was the Raiders moving up to the number 3 pick in the draft.
Congratulations.
I'm scared because things usually don't work out in our favor when it comes to this or getting into the playoffs either. We usually, it feels like 90% of the time we end up with the pick in between 6 and 13, which is just like a terrible spot to be. Hopefully it does not go that way. Hopefully we, get a top 3 pick, hopefully number 1 or number 2. Because the Giants are going to want to take a quarterback, and I assume every team that's going to want a quarterback is going to be talking to Jacksonville for trading up for that spot. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But obviously, as of right now, it couldn't be going any better for that because the Raiders have the worst record in the NFL.
The best thing I saw was one of the college football games this weekend, 12:30 on ESPN. It was Arizona State beating BYU. Thank you. I almost called them the Mormons. Excuse me. BYU, Brigham Young. It was 28-23.
That's what they are.
Most of them are, yes. But not only was our friend DJ there on the field, they had one of the most iconic moments of the season. They rushed the field with 1 second left. Their quarterback on 4th down was rolling around, launched one out of bounds, thought the game was over. Us on TV knew about 30 seconds in, there was a second left. The ball hit a seat. They had a camera zoomed in. We saw there was about 1.5 seconds left. They did not know. It took about 20 minutes to take them back from the field, back up to the seats, and most of them didn't even make it to the seats. They just moved them to the side where the play wasn't happening. Hail Mary was tackled at the 2. Luckily for them, they weren't embarrassed. They're moving on. Probably their biggest win in about 10 years.
Well, hopefully a cool moment for Arizona State. They're very much in it. And maybe we'll be talking about them in a little bit with our college football brackets. But we'll move into the MLB moves. Again, nothing too crazy, but we did get a handful of some decent, I guess, impactful moves. We had a whole bunch of non-tendered moves on the 22nd. So I guess that was, Saturday or Friday. But we did get a big trade, I'd say, on that day as well, too, when we got Jonathan India and Joey Weimer going to the Kansas City Royals for Brady Singer. This is a thing that we kind of talked about with the Royals earlier when we were doing our team grades and stuff about a month ago with them, is that they need more bats, and this helps a ton with that. Jonathan India has obviously been one of the better hitting second basemen in the league over his 4-year career so far. And on the other side of that, Brady Singer going to Cincinnati, they've been needing pitching. That's something that they've been trying to attack for a long time now. They've kind of had this log jam with all these different guys that could play second base. Finally say Jonathan India is the guy that's going to be out of here, and they move him to Kansas City for Brady Singer, who's been pretty damn good over the past couple of years as well, too. We also had some other smaller signings. We saw Giovanni Gallegos agree to a minor league contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers on the 23rd. Gallegos, at this point in his career, maybe not, the all-star level reliever that he was a few years ago, but with the Dodgers' ability to turn, relievers or whoever it may be, whatever position, into what they were or even better than what they were, I wouldn't be shocked if Gallegos becomes an impact arm for them. We did see Yusei Kikuchi sign a 3-year deal, $63 million with the Los Angeles Angels. Yesterday, or he agreed to that. I don't think he's officially signed it yet, but probably the first and the biggest domino that's fallen within the offseason signings, that is. I'd say the India Singer trade is probably bigger, but still noteworthy there. And the Angels seem to be the only team spending in the first couple of weeks of the offseason. Trevor Plouffe, I think he said was that he loved it or something like that. And he loves that the Angels are spending and all this stuff. I'm like, okay. It really doesn't matter because these aren't really super impactful moves. Kikuchi's decent at times, but it's not like they're moving the needle much here. That is. But that's pretty much it for right now. We did get some other minor league contracts, but I don't think they're too noteworthy as of right now. And maybe we'll talk about some others in the coming weeks.
All right.
Yeah. Moving on from that, though, we'll get into our defensive player, and rookie of the week in the NFL. We'll get started with player week. It seems pretty obvious for this one.
Yeah, Saquon Barkley had one of those games that if you watched it live on prime time, you're going to remember it for a while. 302 yards from scrimmage, 255 of those on the ground with 2 long touchdowns. That's the most since the days of MJD, Adrian Peterson, and one I found, Jerome Harrison, a Cleveland running back, like the one time they were good in the past 25 years with Derek Anderson, maybe. So good for those guys, but you are no longer the last to reach these numbers. Shout out to Saquon.
Yeah, really crazy day. Like you said, 255 on 26 carries, 2 touchdowns, and 4 catches for 47 yards. It's ridiculous. And as a Saquon Barkley fantasy owner in a game where I needed him to kind of go off to win my matchup this week, that first 70-yard touchdown I was freaking out for. The second one I was just laughing because I was like, holy crap, how did I get this guy at pick 9 or whatever I had in our league? He's been so dominant, and he's been the best running back in football this year, and it's starting to get to the point where it's not that close either. On to defensive player of the week.
It's another no-brainer for me. I'm going with Myles Garrett because he single-handedly beat the Steelers in the snow on Thursday night. 3 sacks, punched the ball out a couple times. Shout out to Kobe Bryant's game-winning pick 6 against Kyler Murray. That was pretty cool, but I think Myles Garrett was the only guy who was really unblockable this week.
Yeah, I'm also going to go with Myles Garrett for mine as well, too. Another primetime game. Cool weather game, obviously. Like we saw the pictures at the start of the second half compared to when the game ended, what the field looked like. It was like all green to all white, which is pretty cool for football fans. Of course, Myles Garrett made a living during that time period. 3 sacks, a forced fumble. We did defensive player of the year stuff because he is that type of player. So he is my defensive player of the week. On to rookie of the week.
Caleb Williams is going to get his first one for me. He dropped back 50-plus times against that nasty Minnesota defense and almost beat them in OT. He was first in passing yards in the NFL this week with 340. He had 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, finally starting to figure things out. And a pretty bad situation, and I'm not talking about the guys around him. He's got some great receivers, but we've all seen this story before. We'll talk about it later, but Chicago's not the best at building a great environment for their young quarterbacks.
Yeah. Yeah, I also went with Caleb Williams as well, too. Like you said, he dropped back a ton, but he was really efficient in all those dropbacks. 340 yards, like you said, led the league in passing yards this week. 2 touchdowns. His runs, I think, were also pretty important as well, too. He ran for multiple first downs on 3rd down. Which is good for him to see. That's something that he's kind of been known about at USC and in his time of even Oklahoma. Like he's a really good, maybe not a runner, but he's really good at making plays with his feet, off schedule. And that's kind of the biggest thing with him. We saw him do that in multiple facets in this game as well, too. We saw that crazy roll out to the right side and flip it up to, I don't know if it's Swift or whoever it was, but they made a pretty crazy catch as well, too. But just stuff like that is not something that we've seen from him too much in the first, 11 or 12 weeks of the season. And seeing that last week was really cool to see. Even in the loss, I think he deserves a Rookie of the Week honor. So we'll move into our NFL playoff predictions off of this. We're using the as-is bracket right now, so there isn't we're not predicting over the next 3 or 4 games or however many games are left in the season. We're just going with what it is right now, what the matchups would be, and our picks throughout as we go to the Super Bowl. We'll start off in the AFC wildcard with that 2-7 matchup between Buffalo and the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, this one's going to be Buffalo for me. Shout out to Denver, everything they've been able to do this season, but a West Coast team going to Buffalo usually doesn't end very well.
Yeah, I'm going with Buffalo as well too. Just not quite the time yet for Denver. Number 3, Pittsburgh versus number 6, Chargers. These two teams are really similar, in my opinion.
Yeah, and maybe because of that, I'm going to stick with the home team, Pittsburgh. It's another situation where you have a West Coast team going to the north. Things are done a little differently there. Pittsburgh can run the ball a lot better than, almost said the Clippers, Jesus, the Chargers have. And now Dobbins has a knee injury. We got to check on that one too. Maybe they won't end up being the 6 after that.
Like I just said, these teams are very similar. If they're playing in Pittsburgh in early January, you can only imagine what the weather is going to be like in this game as well too. They both are kind of, rely on their defense, don't turn over the ball on offense, and that's how they win games. And so I decided to make my pick based off of who I think the better quarterback is. And I think Justin Herbert's a better quarterback than Russell Wilson. I know the Chargers lost last night, and it was probably a game that they should have won. But what I saw from Justin Herbert is that he's willing to make plays on the ground. He's willing to run for it. He's got a cannon of an arm that we've seen throughout his career, even back when he was at Oregon. And I think at this point in his career, he's just really careful with the football. And that's something that Chargers team really much values. And I think this would be honestly a great matchup, but I think they probably win 6-3 or something like that, 7-6 or 10-6 or something like that. This isn't going to be a matchup where each teams are getting to 20 points or something like that. And then the last one in the AFC, number 4 seeded Houston versus number 5 seeded Baltimore.
I got Baltimore rolling in this one. Houston not playing their best football, probably the worst stretch of this CJ Stroud era. And it's hard to explain because he's not necessarily having a bad season, but things are not going well for Houston. Luckily for them, they got a decent lead over Indy. Baltimore is going to move on.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Baltimore here as well, too. It's pretty tough to not go with Baltimore with how Houston's been playing over the last 2 weeks. Obviously, this matchup isn't going to take place in late November like we're talking about it now. But if it was to take place now, I don't think there's a chance Houston were to win this game. Baltimore they got the momentum. Houston does not. Obviously, there's a month for Houston to, win 3 or 4 more games in a row and kind of change everything up. But as of right now, I don't think you can make a case for Houston winning this game, especially with how good Baltimore's been recently. On to the NFC side, the wild card, of course, 2-seeded Philly versus number 7 Washington. We saw this matchup just about a week and a half ago.
Yeah, we just saw this one. It played out pretty much exactly how most of us expected. Washington is going to go quick. They're going to try their best, but Philly can ground and pound you all night long, and it's really hard to stop. I know that's a possible phrasing issue right there, but Philly figured it out, man. The O-line was questionable. They got Mekhi Becton looking like a Pro Bowler. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, I don't think there's too many 6'8", 350-pound guards in the league right now. Mekhi Becton is one of them, or maybe the only one. Yeah, I had the same result here. I have Philly moving on. This offense right now is unstoppable with how good Saquon is. And as Jalen Hurts is he's been better than what we saw last year from him. I think especially if Devonta Smith gets healthy down the stretch, if they have A.J. Brown, Goddard, Smith, Saquon, Hurts, it's going to be damn near impossible to stop the team. So we'll see how that goes there. Their defense has been good as well, too. We saw Quinyon Mitchell have another good game against Puka. I know Puka had 115 yards, but when matched up against Quinyon, he had one catch for 14 yards. That's like the third or fourth straight game that he's locked down the other team's wide receiver when matched up with them. So he's been really good. I like what I'm seeing from Philly. And Washington just has been kind of in that same Houston-esque slump right now. Number 3 seeded Seattle versus number 6 seeded Green Bay. We've seen this matchup in the playoffs before. Maybe we'll see it again this year.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't trust either of them, but someone's got to win. So I'm going to go with Green Bay on the road because I think they are finally starting to figure out the formula to winning in January. You know, a lot less picks from Jordan Love these past 2 weeks. They've been running the ball with Jacobs very well. The defense is finally playing up to their standards, and we'll see what happens. You know, it's definitely a gauntlet of a division in the North this year, but they're still in the race.
Yeah, the NFC West teams this year, just it's really hard to pick them to win any games right now when they're not matched up with each other because all of them have so many flaws within them. And Seattle probably is the most flawed team in that division, which is kind of crazy to think about when they are technically leading the division right now. I believe it's tiebreaker wise, but we'll get more about that in the next couple of weeks, of course, on who actually is the best team in the division. But I think Green Bay beats them regardless. I like what Green Bay's done with Jacobs, especially within the last few weeks. They're just kind of giving him the ball over and over and over again, and that's proven to be successful whenever you did that. I mean, as a Raider fan, obviously I experienced Josh Jacob, reality for multiple years, and when we gave him the ball 20-plus times, we won the game a lot of the time. And that's what Green Bay is finding out right now. Mix that in with good defense that forces a lot of turnovers versus a QB in Geno Smith that has a turnover problem. You can kind of see how this game might turn out. Number 4, Atlanta versus number 5, Minnesota.
I got the team from the North getting the job done again. Minnesota on the road. Seems like most of the time 5 is the favorite over 4, whether or not they're hosting. And Sam Darnold still getting the job done, right? The win is, at the end of the day, the thing that matters the most. And what I really like about them is when Jefferson gets taken away, they can win without Jefferson.
Yeah, I'm going Minnesota here as well, too. It feels really weird with this Minnesota Vikings team because it kind of feels like, okay, when's the trap game coming? When are they just going to lose to a team that they should not lose to? And it hasn't happened yet. They're 9-2. They're a game out of the division, which is kind of crazy to think in difference of, I mean, Minnesota's been really good, but Detroit's been on another level. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about them in a second or two, but Minnesota, I mean, they're, one step away from being the number 1 team in the NFC right now, which is kind of crazy to think about. And that's credit to Sam Darnold's credit to Kevin O'Connell's credit to their defense and Brian Flores, Andrew Van Ginkel, who I talked about last week as a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. And they just done a really good job of playing team football. And it's cool to see. I will say that. So I'm picking Minnesota. On to the AFC divisional round. We'll start off with that number 1 seeded Kansas City going up against, Baltimore for you?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Kansas City's not going to lose in this round, unfortunately. I could see it someday happening. It's not a perfect squad. We know that after they lost to Buffalo, but when it comes to playoff time, this is not the round to knock out Kansas City.
Yeah. I have Kansas City versus 6-seeded Chargers in my scenario here. I have Kansas City beating them. It's a good season for the Chargers. It's just not good enough to beat Kansas City. And a lot of teams' good seasons or great seasons aren't good enough to beat Kansas City. So that's not really saying much. Number 2-seeded Buffalo versus number 3-seeded Pittsburgh for you.
Yeah. I obviously got Buffalo at home again in this one. It's just a really good matchup. They have a lot more explosive plays than a team like Pittsburgh will. And at the end of the day, the quarterback has to bail you out. Josh Allen usually gets the job done.
Yeah, I have a fun matchup for mine. I have 2-seeded Baltimore or 2-seeded Buffalo playing number 5-seeded Baltimore. We saw this matchup earlier in the year. Baltimore kind of steamrolled them. I don't think it's going to be that, aggressive, but I do think Baltimore does win this game. I think the ability that Baltimore has to control the football right now, especially with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, just that duo of how unstoppable it is. We saw it. Their first touchdown drive last night, like, is Derrick Henry 10-yard chunk. Derrick Henry 10-yard chunk. They get down to the 5. Derrick Henry scores, but there's a penalty. What do they do? Just a read option. Lamar Jackson makes the guy miss and gets into the end zone. Like, when you get in a playoff scenario, like, they're not even going to mess around passing the football. They're going to win first down, and from there, the game's over. So I think Baltimore does beat Buffalo in this scenario. On to the NFC side, number 1 seeded Detroit versus number 6 seeded Green Bay for both of us.
Yeah, Detroit hasn't had that big of a problem with Green Bay yet. I think they play them one more time, maybe at the end of the season.
Yeah.
So maybe things will change on how we view this matchup. But right now, Detroit is rolling. They probably score 40 points on them again at home.
Yeah, I have no reason to not pick Detroit. So I'm picking Detroit here. They look like the best team in football. They beat Green Bay in Green Bay for 3 straight years, and this past one was perfect Detroit Lions victory where it was gritty and just a tough weather game where they beat them in the rain. If they're playing in the dome and Detroit can run their offense the way they want to run their offense, it's game over. That's why getting that 1 seed for Detroit means so much. Number 2, Philly versus number 5, Minnesota.
One of my favorite Rex Ryan quotes of all time after they beat the Patriots in the divisional round was, "You guys know who's moving on? 3 home teams and the effing Jets." Because sometimes in this round, it doesn't matter who your quarterback is. If you know how to stop the run, get into Jalen Hurts' head, anything's possible. That's why I'm going to take Minnesota. I think maybe if they fall back into the mindset of, no one can stop the run, let's just keep doing it. And then you face a team who stops you. We've seen a Jalen Hurts blow up game this season already. He's due for one eventually. I'm going to take a chance on Minnesota.
Yeah. I do think one more thing is more likely than a Jalen Hurts blow up game, though.
The Darnold blow up.
That's a Sam Darnold blow up game. I could see it happening. I just don't think I could put enough confidence in it to pick it right now, especially with the way Philly's been playing. And Sam Darnold, he's been great this year. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be that stigma in our heads of what Sam Darnold does and what, kind of dumb mistakes that go along with him sometimes. And this could be one of those games against Philly, who's got a veteran defense. They've got young stars in there as well, too. I think it'd be really tough to beat. So I'm going to go Philly winning this one. AFC Championship game, you have Kansas City versus Buffalo, correct?
Yes, sir.
Tell me how that goes.
I wish I had another answer for you, but I really feel like Kansas City is going to get them back no matter what round they're going to play them in here. Baltimore gets the short end of the stick because if they could make it this far, they're really hard to stop against the Kansas City team who's not really gelling on offense. But when it comes to Kansas City Buffalo, I could see another 23-20 Kansas City win at the end.
I have number 1 Kansas City versus number 5 Baltimore. I wanted to pick the Ravens, but I couldn't. No matter who it is that they're playing for Kansas City, like, they beat them, and they beat them in big games. And I think that's just a big demoralizer for just whoever's going to play them. We know it's probably not going to be Cincinnati this year unless they win out or something crazy. And I think Kansas City, even though they're not playing the best ball right now, we've talked about this the entire year, which is their inability to just not blow out a team. They play always close games. I don't think it matters because once it gets to January, Mahomes, Kelsey, all those guys are going to turn it on, and I think the Chiefs are going to be just fine. On to the NFC Championship game, and this one is probably more fun for me because I have Detroit versus Philly, but you have Detroit versus Minnesota. How do you think that plays out?
Yeah, definitely not as fun of a matchup. I think Detroit probably wins this one by 14. And here's where you have Sam Darnold getting behind early and trying to do too much. And I think that's more likely to happen against Detroit. So Detroit gets to go to the Super Bowl based off of the current bracket right now. They got a pretty easy path there.
Yeah. I had Detroit versus Philly. This is a game that would be heavily circled on my calendar because this would be a fun one. And I have Detroit winning. I think both these offenses, both these defenses are in probably the best spaces that they could have been this entire year. But I can't pick against Detroit right now. They just look so complete as a team. And I know so does Philly, especially over these last 7 games. But I just trust Detroit to do it a bit better. So I think it'd be a great game. I think there's a chance this game turns out to be like 38-35 or something like that, which would be obviously awesome as a fan to watch. But I got to pick Detroit to win it. On to the Super Bowl, obviously the big one. We both have the same matchup, Detroit and Kansas City. How does this play out?
The thing that intrigues me about Detroit after getting to watch them for 11, 12 more weeks after last season is that they've been able to come back from some crazy deficits, specifically the Houston game, right? Jared Goff does not have it at all. He can't move the ball. And they're able to shake that off and come back and destroy Houston in the second half. I am just not really sure if I could have that on paper right now against Kansas City because it's never happened before. So let's say Kansas City wins it. Kelsey retires. Probably not Andy Reid for another 5 or so years, but definitely Travis Kelsey. And then hopefully we'll have some change. Maybe they finally won't be the 1 seed. Maybe Mahomes will become human. We'll see.
This is an interesting spot because with the AFC teams against Kansas City, they've seen repeated losses against the Chiefs. And whether it's the Ravens, whether it's the Bills, those two specifically, but also, we've seen the Bengals lose to them a couple times, whether it's in the regular season or the playoffs as well, too. I know they're pretty much the one team that's beat them besides, the Brady's Patriots and whatnot, and Brady's Bucks as well, too. But Detroit doesn't have that same idea about Patrick Mahomes. They beat him week 1 last year in that crazy Thursday night game that was kind of like the coming out party for Detroit to say, hey, the Lions are no longer the same old Lions. And I think one thing that we've learned this year specifically with the Detroit Dan Campbell Lions is that they're not afraid of anyone. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they're going to be, scared of what Mahomes can do because they know that they're just as good, if not better. And I think Detroit would win the Super Bowl, which would be a crazy scene for everybody. And it'd make a lot of people happy because I know for sure 99% of the country is going to want Detroit over Kansas City. So I got to pick Detroit. Maybe I eat my words in 3 months or whatever it is, but I can't not pick Detroit.
I'm sure it would be a great game. I'm just afraid of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid finding that one problem, because they've had a lot of injuries on the Detroit defense. That one guy who doesn't belong and just going at him 20 plays in a row until they fold.
It'd be a fun game, regardless. Yeah. Well, I wish we got to see it in the regular season, but hopefully we do get to see it in the Super Bowl because that'd be fun. The next thing that we have in our docket is to do kind of the same exact thing, but for the college football bracket. That's currently coming out right now, so we're going to skip this and come back to it because we do have a couple other things to talk about. We're going to first now talk about Daniel Jones. He's had a crazy couple of weeks from being QB1 to being benched to being not QB2 to not being QB3, but QB4 and playing scout team safety this past week. He then got waived or requested for his release from the Giants and now has cleared waivers and is a complete free agent now. So, I guess we're just kind of throwing shit now at this point, but what location fits Danny Jones the best? Like, is there a spot that he can play or is there a spot that, maybe a backup spot could be better for him?
I think it should be a contender looking for a backup. So Kansas City and San Francisco are pretty quick, easy fixes for me. We've already seen glimpses of Carson Wentz and Brandon Allen not looking very comfortable in emergency relief. And there's so many teams who have given a hefty contract to a backup quarterback. It's not the longest list of teams, but maybe someone else to throw out there is Miami. If they do happen to go on a little win streak here and grab that 7 seed, they definitely need some Tua insurance. So the same thing doesn't happen again.
Yeah. First team I'd talk about would be the Raiders. That's a spot that he can kind of just go in and play, especially if Aiden O'Connell has a really bad game or isn't fully healthy against the Chiefs. Especially now with Gardner Minshew being out for the season, there's definitely a chance that he could go in there, play 3 or 4 games, and earn a contract for a team next year, or even come back as a backup next year if the Raiders hopefully draft a quarterback. The other one that I would talk about would be San Francisco. If he can play and Purdy's hurt, then I think that's the A1 spot. I mean, he would get to have the top tier targets. That would be his most likely chance to earn a contract next year if he were to go play for the Niners. Doesn't even have to make the playoffs, but just has a good showing and doesn't look like crap. And I think Kyle Shanahan can definitely, really work with Daniel Jones has as his potential, because he's not like an ungifted quarterback. He's, a good playmaker. Just sometimes he doesn't do the smartest stuff, and he has a fumbling problem. The last one, but I think would be the craziest one, because I can't even picture him in this uniform, would be the Cowboys. Because Jerry Jones is like really weird about not tanking, especially now that Cooper Rush is there. They just won last week. But maybe, he could go to Dallas and be a backup for Cooper Rush for a little bit. Maybe there's that also like, I'm going to prove it to the Giants, like that I got to go back and do this. But, Dallas would be an interesting one. My bet would be San Francisco. That would be my, this is where he's going to go. That'd be the best spot for him if I had to pick. So I'll pick the Niners.
It's always tough when, like, I look at a team like Minnesota. It's like, well, Nick Mullins has kind of been their guy for a couple years. There's no way they would bump Danny Dimes over him on the depth chart. And why would he be interested?
Especially with Kevin O'Connell and stuff. Maybe like Buffalo or something like that, because I assume that their offense is pretty similar to what Dable runs, and maybe that has an idea into it, and him being a backup or over Mitch Trubisky or whoever the backup is. That'd be kind of crazy having Trubisky and Daniel Jones, two kind of similar guys. But moving into the other thing that we did want to talk about, we did this 51 weeks ago of last year's rookie QB class. We kind of re-ranked them and put them into power rankings. Hopefully, there's a day in the future where we go back to that and go back to some other classes and look at that and how we'd rank them. But we want to do this year's class first. There's 6 guys or 7 guys that I guess you can make a case for on these rankings. J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix immediately fall into a tie for the last place because they haven't played. And then I think obviously goes into Spencer Rattler. But we have a core 4 guys that have played, the entirety of the year, if not most of the year, with Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, Jane Daniels, and Drake May. And we'll rank them. So in the 4 spot, who do you have?
At the 4 spot, we're going to start off with Drake May. The eye test tells me this guy's ceiling is possibly 1 or 2 for this class, but things haven't been easy for May either. In 8 starts, it's 10 touchdowns to 7 picks. But they've been getting killed in most of these games. He's kind of had to try to extend the play, similar to Caleb Williams. At the end of the day, I think they got themselves a good one. You just pray that he's closer to Josh Allen than he is to Jay Cutler.
Yeah, I do want to preface a couple of things when I do my rankings. I do think all 4 of these top guys are going to be good. Yeah. And also, maybe J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix can be too, just we haven't seen him play. Spencer Rattler, maybe not. But I think all 4 of these guys are going to be good. And the second thing is I tried to not look at stats as much on this, but maybe more the eye test and kind of on my own personal opinion, not what the science says or whatever about these quarterbacks. So I did go with Drake May as 4. I do think he has a good chance to be really good in this league. Just as of right now, what we're seeing is not as good as what these other 3 guys are, would be my way to describe it. Drake May's, great playmaker, sometimes makes a mistake, but when you have, who's their top wide receiver, like Boutte or War, like they don't have a top wide receiver. They have Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper, who are, decent veteran tight ends. They don't have a crazy running back in Ramondre Stevenson. He's just, as far as supporting cast go, he's by far last on this list. And that's saying something because the Broncos supporting cast is like 30th out of 32 teams in the league. And there's still a wide margin between those two. But what Drake May's done with it, I still think has been pretty impressive. being able to stay in some games against some good teams and even win a game or two. But I still do have him at the 4 spot. Number 3.
At number 3, I'm going to go with Caleb Williams. A lot of highs, but a lot of really low lows so far for Caleb and the Bears. It's hard to blame the quarterback for this black hole in Chicago that's been just sucking up quarterbacks for the last 100 years. But this is about what I expected from Caleb. There's no need to overreact. He just had a fantastic week. And I don't think it's the young playmaker's fault that there's idiots in charge here. I think he gets bumped down from the number 1 spot, obviously, because of the numbers. But it's not all about the numbers. This top 4, they've all been pretty good, like you said. But he's 3 right now.
I do also have Caleb in the 3 spot, and that pained me to do because I do think very highly of Caleb, and I know there's a lot of kind of smack that goes around him, but I think he's been really good this year for what he's been having to deal with, especially an offensive coordinator. I know as far as supporting cast goes, this Bears offense is better than the Commanders, Broncos, and Patriots by a very long distance. And I know I said I wouldn't get into statistics, but there was a stat that I heard this past week that was pretty interesting. It was talking about DJ Moore's depth of target this year. And going into this past week, it was 9 yards or something like that. So a lot of stuff that they were doing was pretty far downfield to get the ball to him. And in the first week without Shane Waldron, their offensive coordinator, the depth of target was 0.8 yards. There's a lot of screen passes, a lot of getting him the ball. We saw that again this past week, and it worked again for the Bears, and that's another reason why Caleb had a good game. And that's exactly what you should be doing with a rookie quarterback, especially in his first few games. Get it to his best target in the easiest way that you possibly can and just build that connection from there. And then you start going downfield, and then you start having these more shots. And the more and more you go underneath is the more and more the deep shots are going to be open. So I think that they're now on the right page with Caleb Williams and with DJ Moore, especially because we saw that be a big problem for them for a solid 6 or 7 week stretch. Now I think that they got that going on correctly. I think they have a good run game. I like the Bears. I like Caleb Williams. It's just not their season right now. Maybe next year. Number 2.
Bo Nix, Denver. What a great surprise for everyone outside of the AFC West. I'm sorry. But Bo Nix has looked more pro-ready than Caleb and Drake May this season. And probably a lot of thanks goes to Dan Lanning at Oregon and Sean Payton. But the whole point about this is that offense is disgustingly bad, and Bo Nix has them on pace for a playoff spot already. And another reminder to everybody, this is not supposed to happen. Only RG3 and Andrew Luck are supposed to be doing this right now. So that's why I put Bo Nix over Caleb. He's actually winning games despite all the bullshit around him.
Yeah. Number 2 for me, I have Jaden Daniels. And this hurts me to say because I'm a big Jaden Daniels guy. He's been great. Don't get me wrong. What he's done this year in terms of being able to just push the ball downfield at this ridiculous efficiency rate is pretty unheard of for a rookie. I think the injury is another big reason why he's not on 1 for me right now. Obviously, we don't know what we don't know. Yeah. And if he, was truly healthy over these past few weeks, then it would be tough, but it definitely looked like he was not. And so I do move Jaden Daniels down. He's still been great. He's got a good wide receiver 1, and he's utilizing Terry McLaurin about as well as a rookie quarterback can for the wide receiver 1. Good run game as well, too. I like what they have in Jaden Daniels, and I also think they have probably the best play caller out of any of these guys for the rookie quarterback as well, too, with Jaden Daniels. Number 1.
Oh, yeah, I did give Daniels the nod because I don't view him as one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. I view him as one of the best quarterbacks I've seen this season. He's been one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the entire league, a slightly better passer rating, and a much better QBR than Bo Nix. And Bo Nix is also playing his best football right now. And if, I know it's not all about the numbers, but most of the time the numbers don't lie. Jaden Daniels, when his hand is not having to be glued together to throw a football, has looked pretty spot on this season. But I'll tell you what, these guys are a lot closer than I thought they would be.
Yeah. Number one for me, I do have Bo Nix. This is something that would be pretty shocking for me to say 12 weeks ago because I did not have this opinion of him, but he has been really impressive for the Broncos. And I know he just carved up the Raiders. We were missing like 5 defensive players, so I'm not really like targeting that game specifically, but he's just been really, he looks very calm and very experienced when he's playing the game. That's not something we see a ton from rookie quarterbacks, and I can guarantee you it's because of two things. It's one, because of that Oregon pro style, modern day NFL type offense that has a lot of motion and a lot of speed and just kind of is more equivalent to what you would run in the NFL nowadays. And also just the experience of playing a ton. He's had the most career starts out of any quarterback at the college level, and we're seeing that pay off for him right now because he doesn't look like, oh shit, when I'm in the pocket, like we see most quarterbacks do, rookie quarterbacks, that is. We talked about this a couple weeks ago as well, too, how this kind of helps the Dylan Gabriel case as well, too. Bo Nix looking good because Dylan Gabriel is like a lefty Bo Nix when it comes to how many games have he played. He played at UCF, he played at Oklahoma, and now he's playing at Oregon, and he's playing under Dan Lanning in that Oregon offense that we know is fruitful for quarterbacks now at this point when looking at Bo Nix. So that's just something I've noticed as well, too. Maybe Dylan Gabriel shoots up the draft boards to be a third-round pick or whatever, but Bo Nix has been really good. I'll say that.
Yeah.
So we'll move off of that.
Kelly, but it actually works.
Yeah. We'll move off of that and into the CFP bracket because we did finally get that. That was good to see. I'll quickly go through the rankings as how they have it. They have the 4 teams getting the bye. Number 1 seeded Oregon, of course. Number 2 seeded Texas. Number 3 seeded Miami. And number 4 seeded, this guy's got a smile on his face already, it's the Boise State Broncos. And then 5 through 12 will go through. The 5 seed is Ohio State. No surprise there. Number 6 is Penn State. Number 7 is Notre Dame. Number 8 is Georgia. Number 9 is Tennessee. Number 10 is SMU. It's good to see. Number 11 is Indiana. And number 12, for their first time in the CFP rankings, at least in the bracket that is, it's Arizona State, which we know makes DJ pretty happy. So I guess we'll go kind of impromptu here because obviously we haven't had time to think about this. This stuff just came out. But we'll go starting off with the first round. Arizona State versus Ohio State. How does that game go?
Yeah, we got to apologize to DJ because they're going to get absolutely smacked here. I really like what Kenny Dillingham is doing there. There's a reason why he stuck out as a assistant coach at Oregon for so long. He wanted his dream job at his alma mater, Arizona State. Things are going very, very well, but Ohio State spent so much money in the portal building this team and the depth. They're probably going to get killed.
Yeah, I'm on a similar page, but I think you still have to come out of it looking at this is a great season for Arizona State to even be mentioned in college football playoff at this point and having the opportunity to go to a 5-seeded Ohio State is pretty ridiculous. They've set them up to being up in a great spot to potentially win their conference in the Big 12. I think looking at the rankings, they are the only Big 12 team in there right now because Notre Dame obviously has to be in there as well too right now. That's pretty crazy. If you told us, beginning of the season, would Arizona State be the team that's there? I'd say no. I'd say it's probably 3 or 4 different teams before we even got to Arizona State, and they've beat all the teams that we potentially would have had in there, whether that was Utah or even Oklahoma State, who's been really bad this year but came into the season pretty good. Kansas State, BYU, Arizona, who they're going to play this week, has had a terrible season, but it was garnering some potential rumors going into the season of being a really good team. So
technically, Tulane can jump the Big 12 if they crush Army. I think that's the only way the Big 12 doesn't get in.
But I do have Ohio State by a pretty wide margin.
Yeah.
The 8 or 9 game is next. It's 8-seeded Georgia versus 9-seeded Tennessee. We've seen this matchup this year. How do you think it plays out in this one?
Yeah, this one's a bummer for Tennessee because I really think that they're going to play well against Texas in a couple weeks if everything lines up for them in the SEC championship. But we know Georgia usually crushes Tennessee every year, no matter where they're playing, especially at home. They'll probably beat them by 14 again, at least.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see who gets into the SEC championship because if it's Tennessee there, then you got to imagine the seeds would flip.
Yeah.
But I see this game probably playing out the same way that it would in the regular season if they're playing at Georgia. Probably, I wouldn't say 2-score win. I'd say 1-score win. I definitely think it'd be closer this time around. But I do think the Bulldogs would pull this one out as well, too. Next up, 6-seeded Penn State hosting Indiana, which actually would be a fun game because that's a game that we didn't get this year that we were kind of wishing for.
Yeah, that's the toughest part about this. We don't really know. They haven't played each other in a couple of years, even though they used to be rivals. But I think I'm going to take Indiana. I don't agree with Alex saying that they got absolutely killed by Ohio State. I thought they held their own against the second best team in the nation, and that's a top 10 defense, a top 10 offense. Penn State plays down to teams like Bowling Green. I think they could definitely upset them here. It's not that crazy. They're in the same conference.
Yeah. I want to go Indiana because I like their story so much, but I think playing in Penn State, you got to imagine that atmosphere is probably going to be a night game as well too. I'd hate for that to be a 9:00 in the morning game. I'm going to go Penn State. They played Ohio State closer. I know Indiana tried to do some things late to kind of make it respectable, but they didn't really have a footing in that game for most of it. Penn State was in their game with Ohio State, and I think that does mean something. So I do go Penn State with the W here. Number 10 seeded SMU. This is definitely the most random matchup, by the way. And 10 seeded SMU versus 7 seeded Notre Dame. How do you think that plays?
Man, this is like the 1983 championship or something like that with Eric Dickerson against I don't even know, man, Joe Montana. But yeah, it's another situation where I think SMU could definitely beat Miami in their championship game. So this is just shit luck for them because they're not going to win in South Bend. But it should be a really exciting game.
Yeah, I do like this SMU team a lot, but I do not think that they're better than Notre Dame. Without that loss for Notre Dame against NIU, we're looking at Notre Dame potentially be the number 1 or number 2 seed in this thing. That loss against NIU just seems more of an anomaly each week that we go on, and I think that's kind of why the CFP has been so lenient to them for that loss and why they're the 7 seed and not the 12 seed or 11 seed or not even in the rankings for having the worst loss out of any of these teams on this list. But I do think Notre Dame wins this game by probably multiple scores. So moving on to the quarterfinals, we'll start off with the big one, which would be all neutral site games, by the way, of course. Ohio State versus Boise State.
Yeah, I was trying to do the math. Like, is there any chance we could play Notre Dame? Because I think we would beat them, but probably no one else on here. So no, they're not going to beat Ohio State. But hey, if they play at the Fiesta Bowl, they have a lot of history there. Maybe they could make it respectable. But they're probably not going to beat Ohio State.
Yeah. Ohio State only has to do one thing only in this game. That's stop Ashton Genty. And they have the corners and the safeties to be able to stack the box to the most that you could possibly do and put like 8 or 9 guys in there because they know that their guys are going to cover, and Boise State's quarterback is not going to be able to, really get through all this stuff of what Caleb Downs and all those guys are going to bring at them. So I do have Ohio State here, and unfortunately, I think it'll probably be a blowout as well. Next up, we both have Georgia versus Oregon, right?
Yeah.
That's a fun one. How do you think that goes?
Yeah, another rematch of a great game we've seen a couple of times now over the past couple of years. I think Oregon getting that bye, and remember, it's not like the NFL. It's not 1 week off. It's over a month, right? That's why getting that bye was so massive for Boise if they happen to not run into Ohio State. But I definitely like Oregon off of a month's rest to take down Georgia, one of their worst offensive teams we've seen in a while.
Yeah. I definitely think this leans toward Oregon by a good margin as well, too. I like Georgia but I definitely do not like them to the point that they were in previous years. So I'm going to go Oregon. I think Oregon could probably 35-14 them or something like that. That feels pretty accurate there. I don't think Carson Beck is good enough to really, dominate what is now a Big Ten defense in Oregon. That's just Pac-12 anymore. Next up, you have Indiana versus Miami. I have Penn State versus Miami. How do you think that plays out? Because that's an interesting matchup.
Yeah, should be a really exciting game. I'm going to have Miami winning this one like 38-35 in a shootout. It screams like Michael Penix versus Ewers from last year's playoff matchup. And I think Miami having that bye also helps a lot compared to SMU, right? If you have an elite possible first round quarterback, you're going to beat a team like Indiana.
Miami's looked vulnerable. I will say that they've had a good win against Wake Forest. A lot of teams have had good wins against Wake Forest this year, but they played closer games against Louisville, Cal, Virginia Tech, all probably within the second half of the season, and that does worry me. But Penn State also would worry me as well too in the same spot, and I do have a bit more trust in Cam Ward and those guys pulling that one out. So I will go Miami, but I do think it is a really close game. On to Notre Dame versus Texas, which we don't know who's playing quarterback for Texas. It could be Quinn Ewers, it could be Arch Manning. Either way, we're going to be watching.
Man, this is tough. I've been thinking about this really hard ever since
20 minutes ago.
I picked Notre Dame, exactly. But because that's the thing, man, neither of these guys have really been tested in a while. Texas didn't look very good against Georgia. Notre Dame has that MAC loss to UNI. And I think because of that, I am going to take Texas. Their defense has been top 5 this year, like a complete transition, perfect for the SEC. And I think that's good enough to get a playoff win this season.
Yeah, this one's really tough. I definitely do think it's probably the closest, and I just thought Penn State versus Miami is pretty close, but this is a toss-up in my opinion because Notre Dame at times, I said this as well too after they beat A&M, that Notre Dame looked like one of the best teams in all of college football, and besides that loss, there's no reason for them not to be, right? I'm going to go Notre Dame. I think it's really, really close. I could be fine with picking anyone here, but I'm going to go with the Fighting Irish to move it on. So that sets up our semifinals, Ohio State versus Oregon. This is what we wanted. How does that play out?
Yeah, I think no matter what happens in the conference championship game at Lucas Oil, we're probably going to get this game 3 times, which is awesome. These have clearly been the 2 best squads this season. And I think you have to go with Oregon again. It's the coaching. It's turning the quarterback into a possible top draft pick out of nowhere, like we were talking about. And Ohio State's quarterback, I just don't trust him. There's something about him dancing after the win against Indiana that throws me off.
Yeah, it's really hard to beat a team twice, which is something that Oregon's going to have to do to get to this number 1 seed. But it's even harder to beat a team 3 times. And I think after seeing them the second time, I would be confident in Ryan Day's ability to adjust for one time in his goddamn life into getting a victory over Oregon. We've seen Ryan Day just have a lot of losses when it comes down to it. And that's just kind of how his career's been remembered, at least for me. Like, he's lost to Michigan, he's lost to all these teams in the college football playoff, and it seems like he doesn't have the ability to get it done. But I think he gets it done in this facet against Oregon for this game specifically, and it moves on to the college football championship. I mean, it'd be great if this was the Natty, because I think these are the 2 best teams. Next up, in the semifinals on the other side, you have Miami, right? You have Miami versus Texas. Awesome. How does that go?
This is a matchup I really love because it gives everyone in the nation a chance to look side by side. How much do Cam Ward and Quinn Ewers differ from each other as NFL prospects? But then when you think about the actual game, it kind of reminds me of Michael Penix trying to beat Michigan by himself and just getting his ass kicked. And that's kind of how I think Miami season's going to end. I have Texas, despite all the issues, actually making it to the championship, because if you win your conference, you got a way easier path. And maybe if we do this in a couple weeks and it's Tennessee, maybe things look pretty good for Nico there. But at this point, I'm going to have to go with Texas and Oregon.
It's just also like really cool that we're getting to predict this stuff, because it's always just been like, okay, Big 12 or Big 10 and SEC, we'll see in the Natty. And I mean, it might still end up that way. Like you said, you just had Texas versus Oregon, which would be those two conferences. But having the possibility for it not to be that for the first time in forever is really cool to see. I have Miami versus Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's a better team here. I think Miami's definitely more flawed as a squad. Notre Dame's looked more thorough throughout the entirety of the season, except for that one day in September against NIU. But I'll go Notre Dame to move on to the Natty, which would set up an interesting matchup. You have Oregon versus Texas. I have Ohio State versus Notre Dame, which is cool because we have two different teams there, not just like the same Super Bowl matchup that we just chose. But how do you think that plays out between those two, legendary schools?
My preseason prediction was this. And then a couple weeks in, I was like, maybe Miami could do it. But obviously, I just had Miami losing. So I'm going to stick with Oregon. I think they got something really special going on. We'll see if they can go on a Nick Saban type run. But right now, no one's better than Dan Lanning at preparing for a game like this. And at some point, Texas is going to collapse. I don't think they're the second best team in the nation, but I think they have the second easiest path if they win the SEC.
So my matchup, Notre Dame versus Ohio State, Marcus Freeman versus Ryan Day, two coaches kind of notoriously known for not winning the big game. Obviously, one of them is going to have to win this one and become a natty champion. And I'd put more reliance into Ryan Day and his squad at Ohio State. The money's there, the quarterback's there, the weapons are there. And I know Notre Dame's got some good pieces, but it's really tough to pick against Ohio State, especially if you have them there. I think they get the job done over Notre Dame in probably a 2 or 3 possession game. I don't think it'd be that close. Moving on. Man. That was fun because I like the difference that we have, which is always good. Sticking on college football, though, tell me about Week 14, one of the biggest weeks within college football.
Yeah, we already got action going on right now, but you don't got to worry about it. It's just Toledo. So we'll get on to the rest of the games this week. It starts off on Thursday at 4:30, right? The NFL games on Thursday night look like they may suck. So if they do, we got a much better matchup, 9-2 Memphis at 9-2 Tulane. I mentioned this earlier that Tulane actually is still alive for the playoffs somehow. Could you imagine if Boise and Tulane make it? They'd probably get killed, but good for them. They have a freshman quarterback and they didn't lose a beat there this season. Friday morning. That's right. It's a holiday after Thanksgiving. So we got Friday morning college football. Start off with Oregon State at number 11, Boise. One last hurdle, one last time to see if they can escape the West Coast before that conference championship game, because they need to get their O-line back. We're not even talking about a potential Ohio State matchup here. If you want to beat UNLV again, we got to get healthy and not blow it against Oregon State. The night game over there, it's a well-known spoiler, Georgia Tech going at Georgia, who will most likely get a college football playoff spot with a win here. So just if you like spoilers, Georgia Tech's a pretty good one. On Saturday, rivalry week, it's always stacked with great games, and it kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you like the chaos or if you're just looking for some good matchups. So we'll kick off 9 a.m. Saturday with a couple important ones for the SEC. Tennessee's going to Vandy. You never know. Vandy has sparked something this season. Haven't been great down the stretch, but they're much better than usual. But if there's a blowout there, we have the perfect disaster game for the SEC. It's 8-3 South Carolina. I think they just got ranked 14 or 15 against Clemson. So, hey, neither of these teams are technically out yet. If you want a disaster scenario, pick South Carolina.
Yeah.
12:30 after the big noon games. A couple of top dogs are looking to clinch here. That's one of your picks to win a couple playoff games. Notre Dame at USC, usually always a good game, no matter what's going on. Similarly with the Iron Bowl, it's going to be in Tuscaloosa this year. And then one last one to watch. Cam Ward goes to the Syracuse Dome for a spot in the ACC championship game. They should be fine, but you never know in the ACC. At 4:30, maybe the best slate of the weekend here. A lot of questions will be answered. Who will Texas go with that quarterback? Will it be Arch Manning at Texas A&M, one of their old rivals who doesn't lose at home very often? Still technically alive too. I think they're 15th. And on Fox at the same time, it's a big game for the Big 12. Kansas State at 9-2 Iowa State. The Cyclones would jump Colorado with a win here because of tiebreakers. And unfortunately, our night game, we don't really know if it's important or not yet. It's Houston at BYU. This only matters if Arizona State loses to Arizona. Then BYU would need a win to get back in the playoff race.
Yeah. Man. Craziness. And the game, too. I don't know if you mentioned that, but we do have that.
The what?
The game. Oh, Michigan and Ohio State, which obviously.
Yeah, I mean,
doesn't have a ton of implications.
They could put something together. You never know.
Yeah.
Davis Warren. All right. Well, I got a mock draft for you. We'll see if you like it. We'll start going through. It's the same order that we have now. Nothing crazy changed after the game yesterday. Of course, Baltimore won. So number 1, Jacksonville could definitely be trading. If they don't, you got to take Travis Hunter. I see him as a corner more in the NFL. That doesn't mean he can't do both. I see Champ Bailey, and he's obviously a Hall of Famer for choosing corner. I'm sure Balky is going to be like pounding the table to take Michael Williams because he's drafted him 4 different times already, but they better tell him no. Come on, guys. Number 2, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see next year. Like, someone's going to take Travis Hunter like first overall in fantasy, and then he's going to play like 5 snaps a game at wide receiver or something like that in his rookie year. Like maybe more down the line, but at least in his rookie year, I doubt he's, used more than like a gadget guy on offense.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Xavier Worthy's a gadget guy. He's on my team, but I'm not drafting him in the first round. Bam. Good analogy. All right, here we get into the fun stuff now. Unfortunately, right now the Giants have that tiebreaker, so I think the top quarterback pick is going to be Shedeur Sanders, no matter who it is. It's a little weird, right? I've showed you my big boards in the past. I had him in the 40s. He's slowly moving up, but it's a guy we probably shouldn't expect to do any Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels type things. Raiders, of course, will take Cam Ward from Miami. Another guy who may have a Caleb Williams type rookie season. I'm not saying they got the same ceiling, but expect a lot of craziness if you're drafting Cam Ward. It should be fun though. The Patriots
against that.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I like both of these guys a lot. I would be ecstatic if they fell to my team. It's just not going to happen. So I'm trying to look to see if it'll be a good fit for you guys. And well, you don't have a lot of options left other than the veteran route, but I don't know about that. The Patriots don't like them either. Let's give them a left tackle. I know they need a receiver, but you can get one. You can get yourself a Ladd McConkey in the second round. You got to keep your quarterback upright. So we'll go with Will Campbell, left tackle from LSU. The Panthers. Yeah, good. I'll give you some more time. I'm used to rapid firing. So
you're good. I
didn't mean to interrupt you. The Panthers, I actually like what I saw from Bryce Young these past couple weeks. So let's get him some help. How about Tet McMillan from Arizona, 6'5", Mike Williams, Jesus, Mike Evans type of guy?
Yeah, I like that as well too. Probably the wide receiver 1.
Yeah. At number 6, we got Tennessee. Again, we don't really know what's going on with Will Levis, but they have taken so many O linemen in the first round that I went away from that. Let's go D-line. My top edge right now is James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee because he's got the best power speed combo. Everyone needs a speed rusher, but if you could try to hit on a complete guy, sometimes you get Myles Garrett. No, it happens.
Tennessee.
Oh yeah.
So that would work.
At number 7, we got the New York Jets. Again, it's kind of a really complicated situation, but if you try to block out the noise, it's not as complicated when you think about it. I have Mason Graham, D tackle Michigan. The identity of the team used to be the D line. Right now, the guys playing next to Quinnen Williams aren't helping him at all. He's still getting triple teamed, right? So let's get him some help on the D line. This could also be corner. It could also be quarterback. It could be right tackle. I mean, we're a fucking disaster right now. Similar to this next team, the Cleveland Browns. So I actually gave him the right tackle, Kelvin Banks. He's playing left right now for Texas, but well, Jedrick Wills has not been great, and the other guys replacing him have all gotten hurt. So that's not good. The Saints and Bengals back to back. I have them both taken edge rushers. New Orleans, Nick Scorton, Texas A&M, big dude, 280 pounds. I think that fits what they're trying to do over there. And the opposite for the Bengals. Let's give them a speed rusher, kind of different from Hendrickson, Michael Williams from Georgia. Just go down the list here a little bit, try to find some notables. Ashton Genty, I still have you going to Dallas, man. You're not going to trick me, Jerry. You guys need him.
Yeah, that fits.
Let's see here. I have the Dolphins getting Will Johnson at 14. Again, we've mentioned it before. He's a top 5 player in the class. We just got to see if his knee is destroyed and he can't run at the combine. He's not going in the top 5. So we just got to wait and see. I got the Rams taking the top guard in the class, Tyler Booker from Alabama. It's another situation where you hope that it's not a bust. You hope you get a Skoronski or a Quentin Nelson or a Zach Martin or something. You know, try to make something out of nothing here. At 19, I have the Falcons taking Luther Burden from Missouri. Not the best season for Missouri. They haven't really played anyone. So maybe he doesn't end up going as high as we thought. And, Darnell Mooney's not the ideal wide receiver 2 for a team trying to go on a Super Bowl run. I have a similar feeling about Washington here. I'm going to give him Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State. This dude just flies, man. You have your number one. Just try to create some more help for your quarterback so he's not running for his life. A couple picks I actually really liked in your division. I didn't do this on purpose, but I had 23 Denver, Colston Loveland. They just waived one of their tight ends, and you might as well get some help there. And then right after him, the Chargers, Jalen Walker, linebacker from Georgia. Right, you got some old edge rushers. This guy, Jalen Walker, can do both, kind of like Anthony Barr coming out of UCLA. And at the bottom, how about Detroit getting a big run stopper? Deion Walker from Kentucky, big number 0. He's almost 400 pounds. Dude's a monster. And that's kind of the one thing when I look at that defense, what are they lacking? Big run stopper. So, yeah, that's my mock draft. I had fun doing it. I finished my notes kind of early. So, if you want the full list, I'll send it to you too. I know we skipped around a little bit.
As long as the Chiefs don't get anything crazy. That is also we get a
Tyler Warren. Tight end.
Who cares? Davis Warren. Moving on to our bets. So it was a rough week again. It's been a weird couple of weeks. Only one that hit was my layup, which was Detroit minus 7.5 versus the Colts. Skyler had Colorado minus 2.5 at Kansas. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Another Big 12 craziness play there. This week, I have the over in Chicago versus Detroit. I don't hate Detroit minus 10 here as well, too. But I wouldn't be shocked if Chicago gets a score late to make it a one-score game or something like that. So I like the over. I think both these offenses are as good as we've seen them this year. Maybe Detroit's on a downturn, or a down step. They'll be back up. But I don't think it's significant enough to not take the over in this game. I think we'll see 50 total points pretty easily.
I'm going back to the NFL for my layup. I feel like my NFL picks have been much more consistent than anything else. So we'll take the Packers minus 3.5 at home against Miami, possibly a snow game. This one's on Thanksgiving. And I don't think Tua's ever had a good game below 50 degrees in his life. So come on, Green Bay.
Well, predictions last week, I had the Niners versus Green Bay. That was before Brock Purdy was even announced to be hurt. So I think there's a case to say that's an NA.
Yeah.
But that's fine with the red as well, too. Skyler had Cincinnati plus 260 at Kansas State. Again, the Big 12 strikes, and that does not happen. This week, I'm sticking with Thanksgiving. I'm going to go with the Giants' money line over Dallas. Dallas just had a win over the Commanders, maybe riding high off of that. The Giants looked like crap against the Buccaneers, but I think there's a chance, there's an avenue for a victory in this game. So I'll go with the Giants for this one.
I said I wasn't going to do it, but I'm going back to the Big 12. Kansas State burned me so bad last week against Cincinnati that I'm going to take them to beat number 18 Iowa State. Iowa State hasn't played a soul this season. They lost at home to Cincinnati. And Kansas State's angry, man. They blew their season against Arizona State. They're out of the race, but they can give themselves a good 10-2 record and possibly a good bowl game too. Kansas State has a lot of seniors. I think they're going to play hard in this one. So please don't burn me for the last Big 12 game of the season.
That's going to do it, though, for episode 220. In episode 221, we'll get back to the power rankings. We'll know the teams playing in the college football conference championships, that is, not the actual championship. So we'll know a lot more next week about that. Hopefully we get some MLB moves. Feel like I'm saying that every week. Maybe some NBA stuff. Who knows? We haven't talked about that in a little bit. So we'll see you guys next week, unless you got some closing remarks, Scott.
Hey, college basketball's been awesome too. We haven't really talked about it, but we got the Maui Invitational this week. Some very good top 25 teams. And then also there's a tournament in Vegas. Number 1 Kansas is in it. They're playing Duke right now. So far they're destroying them. So we'll see if Cooper Flag has anything left in the tank here.
I'll do it.
All right.
See you next week.
221 next week.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, Cal.
Well,